All right, Jack, tell us more about why this is the standout track for you, and I believe for probably so many Smashing Pumpkins fans, because I did not know this song existed like until Rob Harvilla covered it as one of the 60 songs that explain the 90s, and I remember thinking, that's the song you're going to choose from Smashing Pumpkins, but I feel like I was probably in the minority of people on that one. So tell and enlighten me and our listeners a little bit more.
Well, isn't that just the prettiest freaking song you've ever heard?
Yeah.
I mean, or rather, isn't that how you feel immediately after hearing it?
Yeah.
Yes, I would say so.
I have a thought, and this may be unique to my experience with my cassette dub, right? But this is a pretty common thing about sort of vocalists of this era. But like Corgan in particular has a vocal style where his enunciation swallows and obscures maybe 50% of the lyrics, right?
Yeah, at least.
So that you're mapping your own meanings onto these verses. The vocal becomes a texture in counterpoint to the warmth of the guitars, right? You've got this incredibly warm instrumentation, and then his very sort of sharp, chippy happening. And it's sort of, it's a pleasing tension, it's emotional, it's resonant. And then there are these key phrases in choruses and bridges that emerge that are just anthemic, right? So powerful to sing along to. This whole 5-minute song builds to wailing, I just want to be me. I read at some point in the last week a quote where this might have been from, there was a big Rolling Stone article about him in maybe 95 as in the approach to melancholy, but he said something along the lines of when he would write a lyric that made him feel a cringe of embarrassment, he knew that was the right line.
Yeah.
A lot of his verse lyrics are not great. Not super special, obscure, poor rhymes, sort of reaching, just not that. I wouldn't say he is a strong lyricist in that way, but he finds these anthem lines. Almost every song on this album has one.
Yeah,
that hit deep if you've been writing the song up to that point, right? If you actually do dig into the lyrics, they're cheesy on the surface or obscure or sort of florid in a bad way. But the meanings he's trying to get at, the experiences he's trying to get at, I don't know, feel consistent across the album. And I had my own meanings. And then when I learned what his meanings were, the songs were still super meaningful. In fact, mine and his tended to coincide. It tends to be about this sort of experience of feeling like an outsider, feeling alone, reaching for connection, and also feeling obscurely powerful in your isolation.
What does the cheesiness of those verse lyrics? What makes them cheesy? You think is it that they're? I'm interested by this. I'm interested by something that feels too on the nose. Something that feels. Florid was a good word you used.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes they're on the nose and sometimes they're off the nose. The chorus of Mayonnaise, I fail, but when I can, I will try to understand that when I can, I will. I actually think that's a pretty strong lyric. I'm pretty proud of him for that one.
Yeah.
I don't know, these verse lyrics, I'm just looking at them right now. I send a heart to all my dearies. When your life is so dreary, dream. The sentiment, I'm all about it. That's great. I feel like you left the diction on the table. You could have. There's a stronger way to get at that.
It sounds like a little bit like an old lady neighbor in a Stephen King novel. A little bit,
The harlots of my peril scream. Like sure. Okay, Billy, and not for nothing. It is of a piece with the sort of visual language of the album art, which I find largely unappealing, but sort of sweet. It's certainly iconic, authentic. Right? Exactly. Yeah. And it's certainly coming from a clear and authentic sensibility. Like he wants the album to look like this.
Yeah, he's definitely trying to cultivate a consistent visual aesthetic to go along with that consistent musical language.
Well, and I feel like he gets such a reputation for being like a control freak and for like there's all these like bad associations with Billy Corgan, but when you sort of get down to it, and the fact that you referenced Yassi Salak makes me think you listened to the Smashing Pumpkins episode of Bandsplain. I feel like at the heart of it, like he's just a really sentimental guy. That lyric you just quoted, I was like, I mean, that he's like a few word changes away from a Hallmark card, like in some of the things he says. But he's not known for that, at least in terms of like, you know, the greater awareness of who he is. Maybe now that he's posed with a bunch of cats and stuff, like maybe now.
Kim Gordon just lacerates him in one sentence in her memoir. I think she says something like, Billy Corgan is a whiner. No one likes the Smashing Pumpkins because they take themselves too seriously and they're not at all punk rock. I think those are three things that are basically true, but I don't find them to be negative.
I don't know if I crave punk rock from Smashing Pumpkins. Actually,
sure. I think punk rock. You know, coming from a member of Sonic Youth, punk rock is a sort of ideal. I love punk rock, but I love lots of things.
Yes, totally. Yeah, I love Great British Bake Off too. So
right,
there's
exactly.
There's room for both of those things
exactly.
in our palette of interests.
There was other harsher critics. I mean, also I think Steve Albini is the one who said that they sound like they're like REO Speedwagon or something. I think that was the quote specifically. And Pavement sort of disses them a little bit. And is it in Range Life that they diss them?
When your influences are Queen and Deep Purple and Black Sabbath, and you are playing ripping guitar solos that show off how good you are at the guitar, that's just not where the mainstream of alternative rock culture was at. That was not aligned with, frankly, the philosophical orthodoxy articulated by Kurt Cobain, which was write straight ahead, pleasing, accessible 60s rock songs, and then make them as absolutely ugly as you possibly can.
Yeah. And
fill the lyrics with clever, ice cold, ironic turns about the hypocrisy of the world.
This seems much more internal than a Nirvana record.
Billy Corgan is putting it out there because he has hope that it'll come back to him. There's like Nirvana is laying out something that they're not expecting a return.
They're resolved. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. We are resolved in this rage, in this depression, in this sort of detachment, right? Mm-hmm. And Billy Corgan isn't capable of being detached.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, he's a good example, I think, as different as him and Kurt are and were. You know, he's a good example, I think, or he's a good thought experiment as to what Kurt might be if Kurt had survived. Right, what he would be in the era of social media and how he would navigate this landscape, this changing musical landscape. Because you see Billy out there who's kind of like, you know, like you mentioned the cats and the wrestling producer and all these like myriad ventures that he has that are like shamelessly commercial, you know, like in a lot of ways.
And also shamelessly his interests and sensibilities.
Yeah,
I think
totally.
that perhaps more to the point. Like, I don't think he was ever unclear about wanting mainstream success. I respect that ambition because he never compromised his sound to get it. And in fact, he continued to experiment with his sound in a way that tanked his commercial success.
Mm-hmm. Good point. Yeah.
He swung for the fences every time, and a couple of times it hit really, really big. I don't think ambition is unholy. I think insincerity is unholy.
There we go. Put that on a bumper sticker and sell it on your website. I'm going to give you 600,000 points for shamelessly commercial but never compromised his sound. What was it? It's not ambition that's unholy. It's insincerity that's unholy. Mm-hmm. Well, I'll give you 700,000 points for that.
Thank you.
You mentioned detachment. Do you think that, I mean, again, if you listen to a few episodes of the pod, you know how we feel about genre around here, but like, is detachment something that is grunge? And in that respect, like, because when I was putting together the intro, I didn't really drop too many genres because I feel like Smashing Pumpkins sounds like the 90s, but I would not call them a grunge band, nor would I call them a metal band, nor would I call them like a punk band or a new, like, I don't know what I would call them, but like, I don't know, do you associate grunge with detachment?
I guess so. I think so. If I had to classify this album, I would call it a guitar rock album.
Okay.
And I might call it a grunge album because I actually think grunge, in the way that it makes sense to me, refers more to a moment than to a musical style.
Okay.
I think in a way it's about a scene, a cultural context more than it is about a sound. Our icon Yassi Salek has made the claim that Alice in Chains is the most grunge band. Sure, fine. I mean, I kind of think they're kind of a metal band that was trying to get on pop radio.
Yeah, I'd call them metal before I'd call them grunge, honestly.
And perhaps a metal band that's trying to get on pop radio, maybe that's what grunge. I don't know. I think maybe someone who's more heterosexual than me this is a project for them. But like, there's some alchemy of like a pop sensibility, a detached point of view, and a heavy sound that is what perhaps makes grunge. But again, I think any guitar rock band from 1989 to 1995 that wasn't sort of in the lineage of like Motley Crue, Guns N' Roses, can probably be called a grunge band.
I liked what you said about them being the quote unquote alternative band, because I do think, and alternative being sort of a misnomer for like pop, like pop guitar rock of this particular moment. Because when I think of them, because that shoegaze thing, that My Bloody Valentine thing kind of comes in for me a lot as well. And then I see the direct, you could even say that Silver Sun Pickups like kind of picks up on that sound after this. So like I think they occupy a very particular, in the sort of general pulling many threads from the grunge and the metal and all those other things into this sort of like more nebulous, amorphous, alternative sound. I think that may be the legacy as I understand it, and that as pop, I think is a really well made point from your first part.
If I'm thinking about a sort of like, the general consumer, the most sort of flattened vision of like, a flyover white American in the 90s. What does grunge mean? Grunge probably means unattractive vocals over loud guitars.
Yeah, and also not it's not clean cut, right? There's a visual or sort of like cleanliness aesthetic thing that was like loose. I think is another thing about grunge, where it's you don't have to be clean shaven in the metaphorical or literal sense. And
I think it's something that I think is really sort of funny and ironic about this moment in cultural history is like, this is a moment where the practitioners are attempting to and claiming to eschew orthodoxy, right? They're even eschewing the orthodoxy of punk in some respects, right? Punk has become a fashion in a way that like, we're not even going to wear like leather. We're going to wear thrifted flannel that just looks like shit. And that became an orthodoxy. Of course it did. And Billy Corgan and his band, all of them, I think to their credit, remained out of step with cultural orthodoxies throughout their prime. And in some cases that actually landed them in the heart of a cultural moment. And in some cases, it got them rejected.
Wasn't that ironic? As Alanis would say. Let's see. So you touched on it. You touched on it before about your standards for perfection, and I think they were really well said. And I do want us to kind of like zoom out for a moment and talk about that.
Yeah.
Zoom out, zoom in as you see fit. But like, we asked you to bring an album that you believed was perfect, and what did that mean to you? What standards were you using to assess?
If I'm being really honest, I want to share another memory with you. So it's the summer between 8th and 9th grade, and I'm at academic summer camp, which is where all the coolest kids went between 8th and 9th grade to do more school on the campus of Hamilton College in upstate New York. And all the counselors are Gen X college students, right? 5 or 6 years older than me. At the age of 41 and teaching college, I understand that college students are in fact children. At the time, at 14, these college students were men. I have a very clear image of sitting on some quad lawn, and one of the counselors has a boombox and puts in Siamese Dream, and I take the opportunity to be like, "Oh, I love this album," and this counselor, backlit by the sun, right, his shaggy hair, his long neck, his shades, doesn't look at me, sort of looks into the distance and says, "This is a classic record." And meaning, a modern classic. It's so good that we already know it has classic status. It's only been out for 5 years,
right.
But its status is determined. And with that cosign, I have felt very comfortable declaring Siamese Dream an unequivocal classic forevermore.
This is that's where you get. I want you to keep going, but I'm giving you 2 million points for this ellipses is a classic record.
I mean, honestly, Jack, if you stopped there, I feel like you could just drop the mic and I mean, I don't think anyone's that was cinematic. I had a real clear picture of what you saw there.
So it's got to be a classic. That's what makes it perfect.
If you'll recall some of my counterintuitive perfect records that I also pitched you, not necessarily. I share that story partly because it is part of my love of this album, part of what I think about whenever I put this album on. I learned something about sort of cultural status in that moment. I would say, really, for me, this was an album I pitched you because my criteria were no skips, perennially in rotation, and coherence of vision. Those were sort of my three standards.
Strong.
And I would argue for those in the case of any of the other albums I suggested as well.
You want to say Andrew WK. You want to say I can sense yes. You want to say Andrew WK so bad.
The heartbreak was not doing Zooropa.
Oh, okay.
That was a greater heartbreak than Andrew WK, huh? Okay.
Yeah.
Do you want a couple minutes to talk about Zooropa? I mean, we have not listened to it in preparation, but do you want to drop a little thing?
Zooropa is also class of 93. Achtung Baby is obviously a perfect record and a classic. And then they followed it up with another perfect record that is a classic in a completely different idea of how to use their clout in that cultural moment. Its incredibly dark, jaundiced perspective on media is probably more relevant than it has ever been. It turns out the TV was evil, and we've made it even worse.
Damn, yeah. There's a lot there, isn't there?
But we're not here to talk about Zooropa, and that's okay.
Yeah. I think was it our first U2 nomination, Michael?
No, I think someone had Achtung Baby on their list.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Maybe someone had Joshua Tree. I can't remember.
Anyone who says Joshua Tree is just thinking about the first 4 songs.
I would stand by that. I agree.
All right, Jack. So we're trying this new thing where we ask people what we call the Billy Crudup question, which is inspired by Almost Famous, the wonderful question at the end of the movie, and so we want to put that to you. And in as brief as in as bite-sized a statement as possible, which I trust your ability to do that based on the conversation, so far. What do you love most about music?
Music creates a direct channel to myself. Through my imagination, through the sensibility of another or others, I re-encounter myself. It articulates experiences, feelings, ideas, imaginings. It soothes, but it also calms, complicates. I love pretty music and I love hard music. Rock, jazz, classical? No. I think of that line from Boogie Nights almost every day.
Oh, see, I always think of "Say You're My Mother" from Boogie Nights, which is a very different memory.
Everybody has that one image or line, typically. Yeah.
Music is up there with cooking as just. I don't know how we made this happen, but we sure are lucky that we did.
Yes, there it is.
Okay.
Good one. Okay, I'll give you 60 million points for music creates a direct channel to myself, and I don't know how we made this happen, but we're lucky we did. Listen, Billy Corgan is a weird guy. There's just no getting around it. Somebody who, a self-professed neo-libertarian capitalist, like the just words that mean practically nothing but kind of tell you everything you need to know about Billy Corgan. So I think he'd be happy to know that we're going to find out how well you did and how you stack up. If you won, if you did enough to earn a place for his record in our pantheon. And then Michael will make the final determination. So this is looking like a pretty strong board. 60 million points for your answer to the Billy Crudup question. I'm going to be thinking about that for a while. I gave you 2 million points for that counselor at your academic summer camp saying this is a classic record, backlit by the sun. 2 million points for ambition isn't unholy, insincerity is unholy, which might be the thesis statement of the 90s, right? 6 million points for the Smashing Pumpkins being shamelessly commercial, but never compromising their sound. 4 million points for Ugly Pretty being What's for Dinner. 3 million points for this having never left your rotation, which I think is pretty much the core sentiment around a perfect album, right? 1 million points for that intersection in, I believe it was Jersey that you said you were at when you heard the tubular bells of Disarm for the first time. There's been a lot of red light moments this season. Graceland had some red light moments. We have one here. Love that. 1 million points for our sensibility becoming particularly calcified as it applies to pop music. And I think you touched on that in the wrap up as well. It's a really well made point. 50,000 points for talking about how the recipe has changed with Smashing Pumpkins and how your relationship has evolved with that. And 40,000 points for questioning where and what does guitar music do for us now and where will it go? Good questions, worthy questions. Add all that to the 33 guitar overdubs that you snuck back into the studio after the day of recording to sneak into the final cut for the day that you gave Michael for his 60-second intro. And I would say this is looking like a very strong board, but the determination ultimately goes to my friend Michael. Michael, you heard the excellent case that Jack made. Mm-hmm. Tell our listeners, is Siamese Dream by the Smashing Pumpkins a perfect album? Does it go to 11?
I mean, I think when you reference the moment of your counselor, saying that line, if I hadn't, we weren't already going to give it to you then. I feel like that was the moment. Though I do have a follow-up question, which is, was that when you had a gay awakening as well? But regardless of that, I would like to say yes, that as if this may join the pantheon. This album goes to 11.
Yes. The future was in doubt, but I did it.
You did it. Well, Jack, you've listened to the pod. You know that we also choose a standout track from this album, which we were debating back and forth. I think we had maybe 4 or 5 candidates swimming around, and we sort of agreed we would make kind of a game time decision of our own. I think Tyler and I are thinking the same song, but I'm gonna throw it to him, and we'll see if it's what I think. Tyler, what are we choosing as our standout track from the album?
Well, again, it could go any way, but I think based on the case that you built, it's got to be Disarm, right?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
Okay. Yeah, it does sound different. It's a contrast, and I think it literally stands out in a few different ways that we've already articulated here. It stands out from the album itself, but it does sound like a prototypical Pumpkins song, if that makes sense.
That makes sense to me, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think that its orchestration absolutely predicts melancholy.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's lyrical concerns. There's a little more narrative, a little more sort of clarity actually going on. It's a little less murky and abstract. Yeah. And I think that's also something that's going to become a strength of the lyrics moving forward. And I think it's a lot. It was my gateway drug, and it's a lot of folks' gateway drug to this band and this record. So it makes a lot of sense to me.
I mean, I'm going with it primarily because of the fact that Jack introduced it. Because I think for me, it just depends on the day what my standout track. Like today, I actually listening to it one last time before dropping into the recording. My standout track today would actually be Geek USA, which I've never said before in my life. But also, what people know that song, it should surprise no one that will be a track I would pick from this. But I don't know. I remember this album also reminds me of the time I saw The Shape of Things in New York, which was entirely entirely scored with Smashing Pumpkins songs. Like it opened with Silverfuck. Yeah, like the whole, and because they did, it was a very flawed production featuring a celebrity cast. I think directed by the now blacklisted Neil LaBute himself, also written by him, and But so part of my memory with some songs on this album is tied up in that. But like, it just depends on the day. And today it felt like Disarm is the right way to go.
Beautiful. There's a pumpkin song for every day.
Yes, totally.
Exactly. Jack, thank you so much for joining us, for bringing this album to us, which I feel like we would have eventually covered anyway. It was sort of on that mythical list that exists that we're waiting for people to drop in their lists. And it was just great to catch up with you and chat music with you. Absolutely. It was really great to hang out with you guys. Really nice to meet you, Tyler.
Yeah, what a pleasure.
This has been a lot of fun talking about what's never going to not be in my top 3 favorite records.
There we go. Couldn't have said it better. Hope we get to cross paths in real life sometime very soon.
That'd be great. For the big This One Goes to 11 reunion that we're gonna once we're raking in the big dough, we're gonna fly everyone out to probably Chicago.
Excellent.
Barbecue.
I love Chicago. I will take any excuse to fly to Chicago.
Well, related to this band, I think maybe Metro will have to be the venue at some point. I mean, it just seems kind of perfect for it. It is a perfect concert venue. So Metro, if you're listening, be warned, we're coming for you.
All right, everyone. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you next week.
Fantastic.
Bye.